Welcome to our weekly Integral Relationship Web Jam. My name is Martin Utschig, and I'm the author of Integral Relationships and Sex, Purpose, Love. And I'm here today with my friend Andrew Cohen, who's the founder of Evolutionary Enlightenment and the author of the book with the same title, which I have right here. So you can all see that. It's endorsed by Deepak Chopra. Came out in 2011. So our topic today is love relationships, spiritual growth, and evolutionary enlightenment. I invited Andrew to join us today after I thought more about a question that Sara asked in our first web jam. She asked me, why do I think, me, Martin, it is important to be in a relationship in order to grow spiritually? And in the call, I said, it's basically to avoid what's called spiritual bypassing, which we may cover in another web jam sometime, and that it otherwise doesn't really matter because spiritual practice is usually perceived as something, that we do on our own or in a spiritual community and not in the context of a relationship. But as I thought more about her question, I realized that for me, it is actually the other way around, that we need to grow spiritually to transcend our ego, if you want to use that as our separate sense of self, to co-create an integral love relationship with a shared transcendental purpose that makes the world a better place. And this insight, somewhat oddly enough, was instilled in me after I saw Andrew Cohen speak about evolutionary enlightenment in Sausalito in the fall of 2010, after I had finished my first book, Integral Relationships. Until I saw him there, I was inspired by my former teacher, Eckhart Tolle, and Buddhism and other spiritual teachings. Eckhart Tolle said, the ego cannot love, it always wants something. And Rumi, who wrote, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all barriers within yourself that you have built against it. This was sort of like leading us to this being fully present, surrendered, being present with your partner, be in the now, accept whatever arises, be the witness of whatever arises in your consciousness. Don't reject anything, don't want anything, don't desire anything. Which led then, as I described in my first book, to what I call interbeing, just being fully present with each other. But through Andrew during that talk, which totally changed my life, and I can say there were only 3 other people who fundamentally changed my life, one being Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Eckhart Tolle, obviously The Power of Now, then Ken Wilber with Integral Theory, and then lastly Andrew Cohen. I realized there that it is not only pure being after ego transcendence, which leads to interbeing in enlightened love relationship, but also evolutionary becoming and thus interbecoming. So what I realized is that I'm part of this, what Andrew calls the evolutionary process, which is driven by what he calls the evolutionary impulse, and that my being is not just a passive observer of what arises around me, but that I am an active participant in that. And if I allow this, what Andrew calls evolutionary purpose, to authentically emerge through me, then, hopefully that will help to make the world a better place. So his insights, which of course he can explain much better himself, profoundly changed my life and eventually got me to write my new book, Sex, Purpose, Love, where the biggest part in the middle is about shared purpose, again, inspired by Andrew Cohen. The first part, sex, is about understanding the sexes, understand yourself as a male or as a female or anything in between. And the love part is how love relationship change when we have a shared purpose. And in the book, I show that integral love relationships with a shared biological and transcendental purpose, because I make this differentiation between biological and transcendental purpose. We not only love our partner, but even more so, the unique goodness, truth, beauty, and functionality, which is represented for the integral people by the 4 quadrants, that is co-created between us and our partner at a level of all 7 chakras. The second reason why I invited Andrew to discuss today's topic is because he said in a conversation that I listened to about the future of love in 2011 that romantic sexual relationships should be somewhere between priority number 4 to 10 in our lives. And that really startled me. And I, of course, didn't resonate with that at all. So his comment prompted me to write a critical newsletter in which I argued that love relationships go all the way up and all the way down, so that he's basically making what I call a category error. And you can read that newsletter on my website, integralrelationship.com, under blogs. And then a few weeks later, after conversations with Elizabeth Diebold, one of his former students, she introduced Andrew to me, and we had a phone conversation about love relationships and the importance of having children for evolution, that we cannot, in my opinion, separate cultural and consciousness evolution from biological evolution. And that conversation really continued until very recently. So we talked about it on and off. And yeah, that's why I thought Andrew would be the perfect person to talk about this, because he has some different opinions, or had some different opinions, about the importance of love relationships and procreation. So the idea of an integral love relationship with a shared purpose is shown essentially in this image, where we share intimacy on the left side of the triangle. We share passion, which is sexual passion, but also what we're passionate in life about, and commitment at the bottom of the triangle. And then in the couples in each of the man and the woman there, of course, that goes for same-sex couples as well. We see the 7 chakras, and we see lines between the chakras. And the idea in an integral love relationship with a shared purpose is that we not only, okay, there's Andrew calling in, that we not only love our partner, that of course continues, but that we even more so love what is uniquely co-created between the two of us. And then you see this arrow going to the top. That's basically the ascending, going to larger structure, eros, the evolution, and the arrow down, agape, caring of the body, caring our partner, caring about the earth, and these things. And then left and right balances and harmonizes agency and communion. And I thought it might be best if you first, if you want, share so like the essence of what evolutionary enlightenment is. I showed people your book and introduced it a little bit, what effect it had on me.
You want me to give a short introduction to evolutionary enlightenment?
I mean, you can do whatever you like, but I think that would be interesting to people, and they can hear you and see you on my cell phone.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. So, well, evolutionary enlightenment it's no longer a new idea. I think it was quite a new idea about 10 years ago. But in evolutionary enlightenment, the idea is to put the traditional Eastern understanding of enlightenment and the experience of enlightenment, enlightened awareness, in the context of the Western recognition and understanding of cosmic, biological, and cultural evolution. So, in the Eastern understanding, it's usually thought that time moves in cycles or circles, and that from that perspective, the life experience of a human being is occurring within an endless repetitive cycle. In Buddhism, they speak about to become a liberated human being means that you're getting off the wheel of becoming. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, I guess if any one of us realized that we were on more or less on a merry-go-round, and we've been through the same experience hundreds of thousands of millions and billions of times, at a certain point we'd say, I want to be free from this. I want to experience freedom from this endless cyclical process. But of course, we've discovered that time doesn't move in circles or cycles. You know, if we look at the big picture of evolution, if we stand far enough away in the distance, we see that it's part of it's part of from the biggest perspective, a linear developmental process in which progress is occurring, emergence is occurring, greater complexity is occurring, and extraordinary things are happening.
Yeah.
Miracles are happening. The leap from nothing to energy and matter was an extraordinary, inconceivable miracle. That's very hard to understand how and why that happened. The leap from energy and matter to life is even more inexplicable. And finally, the leap from life to mind is it's very mysterious, but it seems that something very profound, meaningful, and purposeful is going somewhere and is developing in this creative process that has given rise to your and mine and everyone else's capacity to cognize and bear witness of this very moment. The universe is complexifying and is becoming more conscious of itself, and the experience of being human, the experience of human consciousness and cognition, the capacity to be self-aware and to be aware of awareness itself, is the dynamic manifestation and expression of extraordinary creative leaps in the developmental process. And so when we see and recognize all that, we see we're part of a process that's going somewhere, that's on a great journey, and that the traditional idea of seeking liberation so we don't have to come back to be in this process anymore doesn't really make any sense. So in the evolutionary orientation to spiritual liberation, we change really the plot, and the plot is that we want to get over ourselves, get over the limited ways of thinking about ourselves and contextualizing our lives, so that we can live a life that expresses dynamic and profound spiritual freedom, and ultimately care for the evolution of the process itself. And in evolutionary enlightenment, the leap would really be from a life of a small-minded, very culturally conditioned perspectives, in which we usually remain trapped very much in a very small personal egoic narrative. And it's really very much a breaking out of that, realizing our true identity as being not separate from the energy and intelligence that created the universe, is creating the universe right now, and seeing that this body, this mind, this personality that we find ourselves working through is a vehicle through which this cosmic energy and intelligence can not only express itself, but then can hopefully consciously create itself. So evolutionary enlightenment is really about the reason we want to become liberated is not so we cannot come back here, but so we can be the most the best contributor to the creative process as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was just like, that totally blew my mind, because when I went to your talk, I thought, I had only read about you in your magazine Enlighten Next and what is enlightenment, and I didn't know you personally. And so I thought, what else could you say than that any other spiritual teacher like Eckhart Tolle or Ramana Maharshi or whatever, what they said, like be here now and being an observer. And while I was sitting in there hearing you speak, I realized that my being, right, is part of that evolutionary process. I'm not just like a passive bystander of watching evolution to unfold and my feelings or whatever, the unfolding. And I had this conflict of, I wrote this book, but I didn't want to push it on people. I didn't want to come from a place of rejecting what is or not accepting what is. And that just opened up, it opened up for me to show up, as they say, our task is to grow up, to clean up, to wake up, and then to show up. I really got that show up part, right? As me, myself, my body, mind, beyond my ego, in a way, being part of that evolutionary process.
Well, that's ultimately what it's all about, is being able to show up more fully than we could have ever had believed possible, and to be able to contribute, passionately and unselfconsciously.
So when I read your book, which I was very inspired by, obviously, there was also something nagging in the back of my mind. I'm German, right? I feel a lot of pain and shame and guilt in a way about the Holocaust and what happened to the Jews and the Sinti and Roma and all the other people that were killed by the Nazis. And also I thought about the 9/11 terrorists. I thought about people who feel this deep passion and purpose inside themselves to do something, and it's not necessarily leading to more, what I later realized, goodness, truth, beauty, or function. So I really thought about years about it, and was as I was writing my second book, how can I integrate that? That there is some kind of checks and balances in place around that we're not delusional and think like a suicide bomber or something, that we act from a deep place of evolutionary purpose.
Yes.
And that's why I put in my books are like that I'm differentiating between biological purpose and what I call transcendental purpose, which is the evolutionary purpose, and that I say that our evolutionary purpose should be in service of the biological purpose. So, and killing people is obviously not in service of our biological purpose, and it should create more goodness, truth, beauty, or function. And we need to verify with other people first, right, before we act through communication. Is this really creating more goodness, truth, beauty, or function? So I wonder what you think about that.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely. I don't have an argument with it.
Yeah. Any other thought around that, or?
Well, no. I mean, to me, in my own experience, the evolutionary impulse is the inspiration only to bring and to give rise to more goodness, truth, and beauty in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never. I've never have experienced it as compelling one in any other direction than that. I mean, it's the pursuit of utopia. It's the trying to give rise to an unattainable perfection. It's the ecstatic reaching for an unattainable perfection, and the willingness to extend oneself beyond places one would ordinarily go, because one is compelled by the promise of the possible.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's how I've always thought about it. But of course, as you're saying, the Achilles heel of all utopian experiments is can be losing touch with the reality of being, the frailty of being human in our shared humanity. And there's and I think the first half of the 20th century has been a story of failed utopian experiments, which caused many intellectuals in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s to be very reticent about utopian idealism. Mm-hmm. So I can understand the hesitation, and I've wrestled with these questions myself. But nevertheless, the aspiration, the experience of the evolutionary aspiration is one of the most ecstatically positive experiences of inspiration that a human being is capable of having. And I think that we want to learn how to literally ride that current of possibility, learning from the mistakes of the past, mm-hmm. obviously.
Yeah. In the talk you had said evolution is messy, right? And the Big Bang wasn't exactly a peaceful event, right? So, in other words, shit happens.
Shit happens, and the universe started in a huge explosion. It wasn't mm-hmm. a peaceful event.
Yeah.
And that the process of creativity, it happens through, that which is new emergent potentials emerge through creative friction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the energy and matter created the conditions that made it possible for life to emerge through tremendous creative friction in that creative process. And in the same way, new life is created mm-hmm. through creative friction. Lovemaking is creative friction.
Yeah.
New ideas at the level of consciousness and culture happen through creative friction when inspired individuals argue for higher purpose.
Mm-hmm.
They give rise to genius, give rise to genius or collective higher potential because the creative friction is happening. So through creative friction at all levels, from gross to subtle to causal, mm-hmm. that new potentials emerge. Absolutely.
Yeah. So dialogue is important, right? Not just to act on your own, but to act together with others and have, thesis and antithesis that leads to synthesis.
it's essential, and that's, for example, why I started the magazine What is Enlightenment, which became Enlightened Next so many years ago, was because I came back from India with a certain understanding of what enlightenment was all about, but I realized that my understanding was limited, and I was very curious about what does it mean when this understanding and experience of the state of non-duality comes from an ancient context and emerges in the postmodern Western world. I was just trying to figure it out, and so a very big part of my life was devoted to work on the magazine, which was really my own personal path, and also for my students was a path of inquiry of how to understand all this. And so the creative friction of speaking with as many other thought leaders as possible to try and understand more about what this was all about has been a very significant theme in my life and continues to be.
Yeah. So Dorwin has a question that he typed into the comment field here. How has Andrew's view of the authentic self stayed the same or changed over the past few years?
That's a very good question.
Short answer.
Short answer.
Because I have more questions too.
Yeah, we haven't talked about relationships yet.
Yeah. But I think it's a good question. I'm curious.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know how to, in a short answer to answer, I don't know how to give a satisfying short answer to his question, but I have, to be very simple about it, that my teaching of evolutionary enlightenment before I went on sabbatical was very much based upon my understanding and experience of awakening to process, of being able to see, cognize, and directly experience and feel my human experience fundamentally, more from a process perspective than from a personal one. And as a result of that, in many ways, there were dimensions of being human, simply being a human being that became less present in my experience. And so as a result of much of what I've personally experienced over the last 5 years, the reality of the frailty and the sensitivity of my own humanity and everyone else's has very much come much more into the foreground. So I feel that my perspective is now not as biased towards a process orientation as it was before, and that has, I think, helped me much more awaken to my own humanity and everyone else's. But the fundamental principles of evolutionary enlightenment still stand, absolutely.
Yeah. But the authentic self, I'm not sure if I heard you correct, also in a way changes and evolves. Would you say that, or heals, or?
As well, the authentic self is a inherently liberated part of our consciousness, and the authentic self is the awakening to eros, or the evolutionary impulse, or this creative force in the universe. But that creative force is a drive of liberate. It's the experience of a drive of liberated potential, awakening to itself through the body, mind, personality of any particular unique individual. So it's that force in consciousness itself, awakening to itself and discovering itself in and through the unique, complex combination of factors that make up any one of us uniquely.
Okay. So moving more towards relationship, I wonder what your thoughts are now around the importance of having children in the context of evolutionary enlightenment or evolution in general.
Well, I have never really thought a lot about this, except in some of the conversations you and I have had over the past 6 months. I've been intrigued by your philosophy and by your teachings, and I've considered it very deeply, and I've thought about it. In my own case, because my brother and I never ended up having children because our mother kept telling us that it was a really bad idea. My mother told me repeatedly that the only reason I was born is she was Jewish was because she experimented with Catholicism for a period of time, and because she experimented with Catholicism, and which meant she stopped using birth control. That's why she said, "That's the only reason that you're here, honey." So I think hearing this kind of ground into me, just kind of, I guess, unconsciously deterred me from having any interest in having children. That occurred to me because my brother also never had children. I assume that's the reason why. But But I very much was influenced by Eastern philosophy and the Eastern approach to enlightenment. And when I was a younger man, and in that approach, there was always the dichotomy set up between living a worldly life and living a spiritual life. And the idea in the East, at least in the traditional model, was that if you really want to go all the way, you practice a life of celibacy. You don't get involved in romantic and sexual relationships. You don't have a family. You go off to the monastery or the mountain and you devote yourself to becoming conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very influenced by that kind of orientation. And I wanted to keep my life as simple as possible, so that nothing would interfere with my own very deep desire to become an awakened person. So that was my particular approach.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, I've considered a lot of these ideas, and my thinking about this is becoming a lot more inclusive than it was in those days. But that was why, in my own case, why I never decided to have children. And the woman who eventually became my wife, and we've been together now for 30 years, was also very spiritual, had very strong spiritual ambitions, and very much on her own, she never felt that she wanted to have children either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's my personal story.
Yeah. But in general, at the time when we talked first, I said, evolution is also moved forward by, more highly evolved people procreating, as you know, and in my previous web jams, I showed, that I see that the more evolved spiritually and consciously people become, there's a lot of evidence that they procreate less and less. And of course, I'm the last person you would force or demand from women that they have children. That's, of course, a personal choice for everyone, but it has consequences for evolution, in my opinion. So a lot of these evolutionaries, they just think that cultural evolution and evolution of consciousness will just continue to progress independent of who is procreating and who isn't.
Well, that's very interesting, and I think because postmodernism, of course, is where individualism has coalesced like at no other level of development. Of course, the individual wants the freedom and the time and space to what he or she pleases when he or she pleases. That's a big part of the postmodern narcissistic position in relationship to life, and in general, a lot of postmodern adults I noticed over the years tended to not be the best parents because they found it hard to be so selfless. To be a very good parent for a long period of time, one has to really have a very selfless and deeply surrendered attitude in relationship to having children. And a lot of postmodern baby boomers, and I think our children also, have trouble being that selfish because we tend to be so self-absorbed. So that's what's created a lot of the situation. But for me personally, my attitude was I just didn't want anything to distract me from my potential to become a more conscious person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also noticed that when our community was still very much together, that it was just true that we were doing very intensive spiritual work together. That was very demanding and very, very powerful. And a lot of the parents found themselves very divided. Like they found that they didn't have as much time to give to the work we were doing for the cultivation of consciousness, and it just created a dichotomy. Now, I'm sure I could have handled the situation in a very different way, where the whole role of bringing up children could have been seen as part and parcel of a more comprehensive and integrated evolutionary embrace of the process of being awakened adults, and that probably would have had a very different effect. But it just wasn't the way I was thinking at the time.
Yeah. So when you made that comment in this conversation with Mark Gaffney about the future of love, that love relationships, are somewhere between priority 4 and 10 were your words, And I said you never said what priority 2 and 3 are.
So I don't remember the conversation.
Yeah.
That was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. So,
yeah, it was 2011. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what I can say now is that I felt very much. I was always more interested in enlightenment, in God, in the potential of becoming liberated than I was in anything else. I was aware that for many, many, many people, including very many sophisticated people, what I used to call I forgot the phrase now. The promise of perfection, I used to call it, right? The promise of perfection, which is what the romantic and sexual relationship holds for people. In other words, a lot of men and women feel that they're never going to be able to be truly happy. They're never going to be able to be truly fulfilled, unless they can find the perfect partner with they can make love and with whom they can share their deepest feelings and share their biggest thoughts. And at a certain point, I realized that what I was looking for had ultimately was and this is not an original idea, was in myself. It wasn't anywhere else. It was the deepest part of my own self. So I wanted to find that first. I wanted to give that a priority. I didn't want to let anything interfere with it. So, I just want to say this is in the context that I've been married for 30 years. So I've been in a very stable relationship and a happy relationship. And my wife and I are actually closer now than we've ever been. We've been through we've been through great challenges together, for all kinds of reasons. But I'm making these statements I just want to say this in the context that I'm a happily married man, and I'm probably more happily married now than I've ever been, and I feel much closer and more in love with my wife than I probably have been for most of the time we've been together. But that being said, I noticed when I was just watching people around me that I felt it would be difficult not to get lost in what I call the promise of perfection in a romantic and sexual relationship if one was not grounded grounded and had some kind of access to a deeper and higher state of consciousness and a much bigger perspective. And so many spiritual practitioners and very sophisticated people still seem to get lost and trapped and in the romantic in the promise of perfection, and we tend to lose their way over and over and over and over again. So I wanted people to find, as I had found, the deepest source of fulfillment, which lays within our own self first, and to be so grounded in that discovery that they would not ever again get lost in the promise of perfection outside themselves in the arms of a lover. It doesn't mean that one could not be in love and to love and appreciate and treasure company of one's husband or wife or girlfriend or boyfriend. That's not the point. But to be able to see that in a much larger context that one usually tends to lose track of. And so that's more or less how I was seeing it, and it's the way I've lived my own life. I've lived my own life in this way very consistently. And in my own case, I'm quite, I can say I'm proud of the result. Because it's kept me, number one, it's kept me out of trouble. It's kept me out of trouble, and it's an area of life in which I haven't created a lot of karma, which is in this area of life, as you know, people create all kinds of suffering for themselves and for themselves and others. And so I've always felt around this particular area of sexuality, if we don't create karma, if we don't cause suffering to ourselves or other people in relationship to the experience of sexual impulse and the promise of perfection and love and romance, then it's all good. But there's just in this area, as you know, Martin, there's so much pain and suffering and disappointment. And I also have felt for a long time that we in the nuclear relationship, based on the cult of one, so everything's based on the relationship between the single couple. There's so much pressure that men and women put on each other to give each other everything, and I feel this often creates too much stress and exaggerated expectations of what's actually possible. So, and the way I've thought about it, and the way I still think about it, is that that ultimately we want to be able to find the deepest source of contentment, the deepest source of freedom and joy within ourselves. And once we're deeply grounded in that, then will it be able to enter into these kinds of relationships without over-exaggerated expectations and without unconsciously expecting too much from the other, expecting things that no one other singular human being could ever give us.
Yeah. In essence, that we are able to move from need-based relationships to fulfillment or spiritual partnerships, fulfillment-oriented relationships.
Yeah, like for example, like even in just to speak openly about my own relationship and the evolution of it, which is kind of unusual, is that my wife and I met about 2 years before I met my guru, so we were in a romantic relationship then. And then when I met my guru, I became myself a guru, a spiritual teacher overnight. And my wife she remained my wife, but she was very much my disciple. So we had a very unbalanced. Our relationship was, I was very much the dominant in our relationship, and my wife was in a situation where she needed to be subservient. Mm-hmm. In context it was appropriate, in many it wasn't. But since the time of my sabbatical and since the demise of the community, my wife and I have been through a lot together, and we now have found we're meeting in a context of a kind of a mutuality or equality that were there before, and it's changed our relationship very in the most dramatic and profound ways. And interestingly enough, it's expanded my appreciation of her and her humanity, and I think her appreciation of mine in ways that simply wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. So I forgot a little bit why I wanted to explain all that, but I just think that it's been an unusual journey. Yeah. But I am very touched by the fact that we're now closer than we've ever been, So that, because the thing is, if you can be in a relationship as long as I have, a romantic relationship, mm-hmm. a love relationship, and find that there's still a freshness to the experience of intimacy. Mm-hmm. To me, it's very meaningful and very profound. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's my own. It's what I'm experiencing at the moment.
In this just for the people who are live online with us, I posted a little poll where you can vote on 4 questions or answers that I give. So, and then I will share the results. So if you can just vote on that poll, Andrew, you don't see that. Yeah, this call was, as I said at the beginning, inspired by a question from a woman named Sara, who said, why do I, Martin, think that being in a relationship is important for our spiritual practice and awakening? And as I thought about it, for me, it turned out to be the other way around, that I think it is important for being in a integral, evolutionary, or transcendental love relationship to have a spiritual practice, right? So it's the other way around. And then, of course, the question I get often is like, how much do I have to move into my spiritual awakening and healing and growing up until, I'm ready to enter into a relationship? And of course, we cannot answer that question. Everybody needs to answer that for themselves. But I personally, of course, find it problematic. And I just see that so often that people use their spiritual practice and this idea of becoming whole and complete in themselves as a justification or avoidance of love relationships, which leads, in my opinion, to what's called spiritual bypassing. And it's, of course, also kind of a misunderstanding of the holonic structure of what we call social holons, which I believe in a healthy way are built from individuals to couples to families to community to society to all humanity. And most people nowadays seem to focus on, themselves, and then creating community between a lot of individual selves who are, skipped or are not able or not willing or not interested in doing the couple and the family thing, and then that leading to stable communities.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I just want to, I fundamentally agree, but I just want to say that there are, many historical examples of very profoundly awakened, liberated human beings who weren't married and had transcended this particular part of life.
Yeah.
So, and I, on one hand, and it's just part of the truth. So I don't think it's, we could honestly say that we need to be in a all quadrant. We don't need to be necessarily in a romantic and sexual relationship where all quadrants are being fully actualized in order to prove and demonstrate that we're not avoiding it. because some of the most profound examples of love and transparency and spiritual freedom are individuals who decided for whatever reason not to take that route. Now that doesn't mean that because sexuality and having it and the experience of it of intimacy with another human being and knowing how to be vulnerable and to be intimate and to give and to share love is also an important part of what it means to be an evolved, vulnerable, transparent, emotionally liberated human being.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a part of what it means. It's not all of what it means.
Yeah.
And I think we just have to keep that in mind because it's important.
Yeah. So obviously, I'm very inspired by people like Immanuel Kant or many others that are probably irrelevant to mention names. Ramana Maharshi, people who never had a romantic relationship. I mean, or exactly. they were never married. Let's put it that way. Kant had romantic relationships. And they contributed immensely to humanity, right? So
exactly, yeah.
I'm not questioning that, but sort of my sense is that the majority of humans, should, benefit from their inspiration and what they pioneered, but put it in service of what I call their biological purpose, and not make that into a means of its own, right? So I had this conversation with my friend in Germany about communities, and I mentioned, that communities that are built mainly with single people seem to be more unstable than communities that are built on families, couples and families. And after she first had sort of like a negative reaction to that, she remembers a community, their intentional community, and they're basically, I'm not sure if they're only admit couples, but they're definitely looking very strongly for couples, if possible, with children, because apparently they realize that sustains their community instead of admitting many single people. Just throw it in as a comment.
That's very interesting, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. I just would hope that we can. I mean, I just know for me, not feeling dependent upon that as being a prerequisite for happiness has been an enormous source of liberation for me. And as you know, Martin, many men feel very intimidated by the force of their own sexuality.
Yes.
Feel intimidated by the force of their sexuality. Feel intimidated by beautiful and very attractive women, and feel very much out of control in the face of the power of eros expressed as the erotic impulse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always felt that for men, as long as they were deeply intimidated and felt out of control in the face of their own erotic impulses, it would mean that they were going to be untrustworthy, that the choices they were going to make under that kind of pressure were often going to be untrustworthy and end up creating all kinds of karma. And in the same way, many women feel that unless they can be in a relationship, in a relationship in which they're loved and adored, that they're missing out on they're fundamentally missing out on the most important part of life.
Mm-hmm.
They'll never be whole otherwise. And so that just, first of all, it's just not true. But being able to transcend that deeply, that's almost like a biologically felt. It's almost like a biologically felt truth, a truism, and also a culturally conditioned belief. And so takes an enormous amount of spiritual work to free oneself from these kinds of deeply conditioned convictions. But my feeling is that if men and women can learn to liberate themselves from being trapped and fearful and very victimized by a lot of these kinds of feelings and ideas and beliefs, they will be infinitely more prepared for the challenges of being in a truly mature adult romantic and sexual relationship with all the profound implications than they would otherwise.
For many years I quote Adyashanti, who said the depth and embodiment of your spiritual realization will be seen in your love relationships. That's where the proof is in the pudding. And people have a lot of problems in their love relationships. And that happened actually after he decided with his wife to do a couples retreat, which was focused on coupled relationships and not on individual awakening, what she typically teaches. And in that interview, he said that was the last time he did that because, even though some of his senior students apparently came in, all the crap around their relationships came up, which he felt quite incapable of dealing with, right, or addressing, if I remember it correctly.
Wow.
So that's when he made that statement. And Eckhart Tolle and others, who are, most Western spiritual teachers are married, and they often refer sort of like as the health of a relationship as an indicator for the depth and embodiment of their students' spiritual realization. So,
well, no, that's definitely true, and I think that question has to do with the nature of relationships. Period. Not only our romantic and sexual relationships, but our other closer relationships. How stable are they, and if they are, why, and if they're not, why? This is very, very, very important. It says a lot about it. It indicates quite a bit.
Yeah.
With that being said, Martin, as I shared with you in one of our chats over the last 6 months, I'm 62 years old now, and so I'm aware that people my age have kids that are 25, and I sometimes thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool? Would we want? I can imagine if I had a boy or a girl or several children that were that age that I could be in relationship with. It just occurred to me how wonderful it would be. It's only recently that I've even begun to consider the delights of being a parent and the gifts of the unique gifts of being a parent. And I also thought that had my wife and I decided to have children, it probably would have taught me some very hard lessons about human development that I probably thought I knew but really didn't. And I probably would have learned a lot. But anyway, that's for another time, or I guess another lifetime at this point.
Yeah. I can definitely tell my children are now 21, 24, and 26, and they're my biggest challengers and teachers in a way.
Because?
Well, they challenge a lot of my worldviews, and they're all girls, so obviously they have their strong opinions about specifically white males, and
oh boy.
But also over the years, just see them grow, and it's just like an amazing experience for me, and I guess for most parents. And I'm lucky that way, that I had a great marriage and that I have great children. So let's see.
Beautiful.
So I just want to read a comment from Belinda. She says, I think in these times, and Belinda wrote a book. She interviewed happy couples, successful couples. She says, I think in these times, perhaps more than ever before, it's about integrating everything, no separation between spirituality and the human experience. For my path, I believe relationships are essential to spiritual growth. It's just a comment. So,
I agree with Belinda, but I would the only question I would have is I would say I think that the nature of the relationships are very important, but I just wouldn't restrict that only to romantic and sexual relationships. Yeah. So for me personally, and it's been like this my whole adult life and continues to be, that the most important intimacy I experience, the most profound, joyful, and liberating intimacy is with is with people I'm very close to,
Mhm.
with whom we share the same spiritual vision, the same spiritual aspiration, the same love, devotion, and surrender for that which is highest,
Yes.
and share our belief and conviction in the promise of the possible. And with those individuals, I experienced the greatest intimacy, and the experience of that intimacy is honestly what I live for.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, where the meeting of our like visions and philosophies are. You know, when I started this conversation with Elizabeth Debold, after I wrote that newsletter, which is on my website under the blog section, you know, I think we had 3 conversations for about 2 hours where she really convinced me that at least in my case, after I already procreated, had children, that living my, at the time, you know, called evolutionary purpose was more important than being in a relationship. And I still, you know, stand to that. And in my new book, I integrated that to propose, you know, that ideally we awaken to what I call now our transcendental purpose, living authentically, and then attract a partner who's at a similar level of consciousness and spiritual and sexual animus complex development, and that we share that purpose in our relationship, like more and more couples around the world do. I see that as a real new emergence where traditional gender roles, you know, of women having the power and the responsibilities in the domestic sphere and men in the public sphere, you know, that this is of course now no longer really the case in modern and postmodern relationships, with women entering the public sphere and having rights and responsibilities there. That the new shared purpose of relationships, or the new purpose of relationships, in addition of procreation and all the things that relationships do for us, is this shared purpose.
I agree.
And that,
of course,
that is the gift, you know, that I think you and your group and your students brought to the world, and certainly to me, and that's why I'm deeply indebted to you and deeply grateful. And as I said earlier, before you came on, you're one of the 4 people who had the deepest impact on my life, you know, besides Stephen Covey, Eckhart Tolle, and Wilber, and you, right? That these are the 4 people who really fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life, besides my wife's and my children, of course, and my parents, but in my later life.
Well, thank you, Martin. That's very, very kind, and I'm honored to have been a benefit in any way I was able to.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you also for this conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I very much respect you and your work, and I'm learning to love you as a friend also.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love you too.
Thank you, Martin.
And I'm deeply grateful that we have this ongoing conversation, because it enriches me tremendously.
Yeah. And I have to be honest, you've given me a lot to think about.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andrew. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but I think we made it work for everyone.